before I forget that. So if you have your Bible, you will want that. If you have a pen and a paper, you may want that too. I am not going to have a Bible on screen. I do apologize for that. I'm going to have my little Bible here. This is just the book of Revelation. I love this thing. It's like a journal Bible. I'm reading from ESV. Translations do matter because they make some little changes that can add up to be big deals. So I'm going to be in the ESV tonight and on this video. And I will not have a Bible on the screen tonight, but I will have a PowerPoint that is minimal, but it's enough to give you a visual aid of where we're at as we go through, because we are going to cover the entire 22 books in this video. And again, we are basically focusing in this video on the timeline and the order of events of the book of Revelation so that we can better understand where we're at in the whole story, so that we can understand, well, when this movie says this, or this social group, or this culture, or this media, or this pastor, or this teacher, or this theology, or this doctrine, they say these things, we can at least take them back to the timeline of the Revelation account and weigh those things. And that's the idea of this. What you're going to notice is that I'm not taking any position in this particular teaching. I'm not taking a position of where the rapture is, pre-trib, post-trib. I'm not taking a position on the millennial reign, the millennialism, so amillennialism and post-millennial and all of those things. They will come up, undoubtedly. However, I'm going to do my best to remove my personal position and present to you just what the book of Revelation is talking about. So this particular video is not going to dive into, as you'll see, just to give you an example, it's not going to dive into when we cover, hey, here's the 6 seals or the 7 seals, here's the 7 trumpets. I'm not going to dive deep into interpreting the events within those things in this. In future videos, we may take time to break down the book of Revelation chunk by chunk, where we can deeply dissect certain chapters. But that's not what this particular session is for. This is simply to go over the timeline from start to finish, the book of Revelation, so that we have a clear understanding of the big picture, which lays the foundation that we have to build upon. Again, as I've said before, we don't want to begin looking at any other biblical end times texts, such as the prophets, such as Jesus' statements on the end times, such as the Apostle Paul's statements on the end times, without having a firm and solid grasp of the book of Revelation. Because all of those things are little pieces of the story, and they're isolated. Even when Jesus talks about the end times, they're isolated. And I'm going to show you an example tonight of an instance where Jesus speaks of the end times, and he's talking about just a sliver of the end times that falls in a very specific section of the end times timetable. But because we try to study Matthew 24, Matthew 25 outside of where it fits in the book of Revelation, we can come up with conclusions on this stuff will happen before Jesus returns, and we get this cultural narrative that doesn't reflect the book of Revelation necessarily. And so we want to study all of what the Bible says about end times. Jesus and all the prophets and the apostles write about the end times. We want to take those little things and put them into where they fit in the book of Revelation, and let the book of Revelation inform us on what they are talking about. So I hope that makes sense. But that's kind of what tonight will be a little bit, the goal is that tonight will be useful for you. So let's go ahead and we're going to dive into the book of Revelation, timeline and order of events. I'm excited about this. And we're going to begin at Revelation chapter 1, as I mentioned, and we're going to go all the way through Revelation chapter 22. Revelation chapters 1 through 3 is known as the letters to the churches. Okay, and so this is a pretty interesting moment in the book of Revelation in that it doesn't necessarily start off apocalyptic. It doesn't necessarily start off with addressing the end times. It spends the first 3 chapters actually addressing present times. Now, this is important, okay? In Revelation, let's see, chapter 1, verse 19, it reads, "Write therefore the things that you have seen, those that are, and those that are to take place after this." Now, when we're reading the book of Revelation, we want to pay attention to verbiage, because throughout the writings, you're going to hear after this, you're going to hear now, you're going to hear are, you're going to hear these words that indicate the process and order of events. And if we overlook that, we'll get very confused and we'll think, well, maybe Revelation isn't chronological, or maybe maybe the seals happen before these, or maybe this. And that would be a grave mistake. What Jesus, or the being given the revelation to John, opens up and says, you're going to write down the events that are, and then you're going to write the events that are to come. Now, when he says the events that are, I'm going to show you in just a minute in chapter 4 when we get there, he's actually speaking of the churches and the first 3 chapters. These are literal churches that John is writing letters to at that time. Why is that important? Because we want to be careful for teachers of the end times who teach things into the book of Revelation, meaning they're speculating. So a popular idea is that the letters to the churches was symbolic, and because they wrote to those churches and didn't mention the church after chapter 3, that must be when the rapture takes place. Because the rapture takes place, notice that the churches aren't mentioned in the rest of the book of Revelation, so the churches must have been removed, and Jesus wrote to these churches right at the beginning, and these churches represent, the 7 types of churches that we might see throughout time or whatever. So all of those things very well may be the case. The problem is Revelation does not say that at all. It doesn't lead us to believe any of that. Therefore, those conclusions had to be read into the text. Okay, they're speculations. And those are where we want to be very careful. We want to spend our time making conclusions based off of what the book of Revelation says. Why is this important? The churches do not represent a church age. And then when that's done, the church will be removed, and then we hit the end times. Okay, these churches were actually literal churches that Jesus was writing to. And there were some things in these messages that pertained only to that church, and specifically to that church. For example, when Jesus says, some of you will be thrown into prison, he was speaking directly to the people alive at that time who would hear the letter. However, there are also other things which are timeless, and they perhaps do represent the types of churches we've seen throughout the world and throughout history that could very much hear the message and really benefit from the message today. And as we break into dissect some of these, and maybe we'll spend just an entire session on the first 3 chapters dealing with the churches, these letters to the churches, we'll see that, wow, the American church, the American culture really fits some characteristics of the Laodicean church. We could benefit from that message. So in that sense, some of the things Jesus was saying are timeless, and they're very applicable to us today, while some things were very applicable to the original audience. But it certainly doesn't represent a church age necessarily, drawing to a conclusion that after this chapter 3 and before chapters 4, 5, and 6, we have a rapture. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about the churches, because we got a long way to go. Revelations 4 and 5. We go into here where we have the worship of the Lamb. All right, and the only thing I really want to spend time pointing out right here, because again, this doesn't have to do so much with end times, and that's really where I want to spend the majority of our time, is that, as promised in verse 1, the whoever speaking to John here says, "Come up here and I will show you what must take place after this." Remember, I told you there's keywords we want to listen for: are, after this, now, and I'm going to point some of those out as we move along. But notice this is chapter 4. This is right after his last letter to the last church. And now we're going into a completely new set of visions, a completely new set of revelation. And he begins this new category of revelation by saying, I want to show you the things that will take place after this. After what? After this present time, right? So basically he's saying in the future, right? Because some of the things that has been written to the previous churches have not happened yet, like being thrown into prison and some of the different things that Jesus is warning these churches are about to befall them. They haven't happened yet. So the revelator is telling John, after those things, here's what's to come, right? And so we have a vision of the throne in heaven. We have this scene where we're worshiping the Lamb, and it's incredibly important because chapter 5, we're introduced to this scroll, and I call it the big scroll. I call it the big scroll, and the reason I do that is because we're going to be introduced to a little scroll later on in the book. And this scroll is the big scroll. It's very important. It's the scroll with the first 7 seals. Okay, and so it's incredibly important that we understand that this scroll is significant. And in chapter 5, we understand, we learn that there's only one worthy to open this scroll, right? The Lamb who was slain, the Lamb who overcame. That's Jesus, right? So we get to chapter 6. And chapter 6 is the first 6 of the 7 seals, okay? Now, I want to take a stop here. I'm going to try my best to draw on the screen. Notice chapter 6, it's going to quickly go through 6 of the seals, and I'll briefly, talk about them. But again, I'm not going to go deep into them. But I do want to show you this before we get going. The way that the book of Revelation works is like this. I'm going to draw, you have this kind of square thing I'm drawing here. It's so hard to draw on a computer screen. But you have this square looking thing. And this is going to represent the entire story. Okay, this is going to represent the whole picture. Now, we have 7 seals. Seven seals. Okay, that's how we start. But what's interesting is, you probably know this, we have 7 trumpets and 7 bowls later on in the story. But what's interesting is we don't just have 7 seals and then sometime later we're introduced to 7 trumpets. And then sometime later we're introduced to 7 bowls. That's not how it works. What you're going to see, and I want to kind of draw a picture for you before we get into reading it so you can see it as we go along, is that baked into this 7th seal are 7 trumpets. One, two, three, four, 5, 6, and 7. And then baked into this 7th trumpet are 7 bowls. Now, this is super important. You're saying, well, why? Because this solidifies the book of Revelation being chronological. If within the 7th seal, we didn't have 7 trumpets, which had 7 bowls within them, one could say, well, maybe the book of Revelation was kind of written out of order. Maybe some of the trumpets will blow and simultaneously with some of the seals and simultaneously with some of the bowls. And if you can do that, then man, you can really make things all out of whack. We can expect the beast of the sea and the beast of the earth like next week. But the problem is, as we'll see, the 2 witnesses come before the beast of the sea and the beast of the earth. And the beast of the earth creates the mark of the beast, which we're all in our society and culture, we're so fascinated by, and we're looking for this mark of the beast, mark of the beast, mark of the beast. Problem is, that comes way later on in the story. That comes in the 7th trumpet, okay? As we're going to see. whereas the two witnesses come much earlier on in the narrative. And so it's important that we understand that we're going to see these in chronological order. Why? Because I can't have the seventh trumpet where the mark of the beast is before the third trumpet, right? Because that, by definition, you have 3 comes before 4, which comes before 5, and so on and so forth. But I can't even get to the trumpets until I've reached the 7th seal. And I can't reach the 7th seal until I've reached the 5th seal, the 6th seal, the 4th seal, and so on. So are you following me how this picture is incredibly important because it reveals to us how things are taking place? So when we're in the trumpets, when we're reading about those, we want to be very careful not to forget that, yes, we're in the trumpets, but we're actually still in the 7th seal. And when we're in the bowls, we want to be careful not to forget that, yes, we're in the bowls, but we're actually still in the 7th trumpet. Why is that important? Well, because if I say at the 7th trumpet, Christ returns, well, that's true. But the 7th trumpet, there's a lot of things that happen within the 7th trumpet. A lot. That could take up several years of time. We don't know. All right. And so this is very important in understanding the foundations of the timeline of the book of Revelation. Okay, let's move on. Revelation chapter 7. So before I hit on Revelation chapter 7, let me highlight chapter 6 real quick. Okay. So in chapter 6, we're notified of the seals on the scroll, and it starts to tell us what these seals are, right? So we have the seal. The first seal is the rider on the white horse, the conqueror. Okay, we're not going to go into a study of each of these right now, but many think the white horse. Many are under the impression the white horse has certainly been released in the earth. It's highly possible. Do I know? Absolutely not. I have no idea. But there are things we could look for. After that, the second seal, we have a red horse, right? War and violence. Then we have a black horse, which is famine, inflation, things of that nature. Fourth is a green horse, which leads to a quarter, so 25% of the Earth population. This is off of memory, dying. So don't quote me on the specifics here because this is all memory. But the fifth seal, we have a bunch of martyrs robed in white standing before the Lord. And then the sixth seal, we have chaos in the heavens, right? We have earthquakes. And that this particular seal, this is important. See, right now we're questioning, are we at the first seal? Has the white horse been released? What the Bible specifically says is in the sixth seal, the kings knew the wrath of God is coming, so they tried to hide. So if I'm taking some of this stuff as hints, what the Bible says, when we get to the sixth seal, maybe the first 5 seals, we're like, are we really in, the end times? I don't know. Maybe it's just sure as day. I tend to lean towards like when the seals are open, I think we're just going to know it personally. But again, we can't say for certain because the book of Revelation doesn't tell us necessarily. We're kind of drawing our own conclusions based off of the evidence we're given here. However, on the 6th, if humanity doesn't know it, the kings of the earth certainly know it because they all go and try to hide. Now, this is funny. I do think we're really close because as I read Revelation today, I can see some of the things I see in the news, right? We have extremely wealthy people, kings of the earth, who have underground bunkers. We have billionaires spending millions and millions of dollars building underground bunkers so they can last for a couple of years at a time if they had to in the event of major catastrophe. So I do think that time for that 6th seal where we're going to see kings of the earth and billionaires and people who can afford it running into caves and mansions they built underground and all of this stuff because they know that destruction's evident. I do think that is near. I think we're seeing the technology. I think we're seeing everything in place for that to be very present. Now, when we get to Revelation chapter 7, there's something that we can observe in Revelation 6 and in chapter 7 that point us to this idea that potentially the seals are the technical biblical tribulation. Okay, I'm not saying that's for sure. So whenever we're talking about the end times with people, we want to really be precise on our terminology, because if we're saying how are we defining that tribulation? A lot of people would define the tribulation as a 7-year period where this antichrist figure reigns. The mark of the beast is rampant for 7 years. Okay, well, as we're going to see, that doesn't match the book of Revelation, that narrative. But it is fair to say that perhaps we could label everything from the first seal to the final bowl as the tribulation time. However, that's going to be probably a lot longer than 7 years. Okay, the time span between all of that. But the biblical tribulation, there really is no necessarily like one tribulation. All right, when we hear Jesus talk about the tribulation, he says the tribulation in those days. So we're in tribulation right now. There's brothers and sisters in Christ all over the world who have been in tribulation, great tribulation, since the day of Pentecost and even before that. So when we're talking about a specific biblical technical tribulation, I tend to place that, not just me, Jesus and the Revelator, as we're going to see, I'm going to show you, tend to place that in the period of the 6 seals. That's what they're referring to as a tribulation, the tribulation. Everything beyond that, certainly, we can still call that the tribulation, but we just need to be clear that when Jesus talks about a tribulation, he's referring to the seals. How can I say that? Write these, if you're taking notes, write these references down and go take a look at them for yourself. Matthew 24, verse 29. Luke 21, 25 through 28. And Mark 13, 24. Matthew 24, 29. Luke 21, 25 through 28. And Mark 13, 24. These 3 passages I gave you are Jesus talking. He's giving the same speech recorded by the 3 different authors there. Jesus is talking about the tribulation. And in the tribulation, he specifically matches the description given in Revelation 6, 12 through 14. So if you want to write that reference down, you can check those 3 gospel references I gave you with Revelation 6, 12 through 14. And notice the language is the same. Jesus is describing, when he's describing the tribulation period in Matthew 24 and those others, he's describing what's being talked about in Revelation 6, 12 through 14. These first 5 seals. 6 seals running there. But if that's not enough, second, we want to look at Revelation 7, 9 through 14. Okay? Specifically in verse 14. So I'm going to jump back in just a minute to 7, 1 through 8, but this is more relevant right now. Revelation 7:14 says this, I said to him, Sir, you know. And he's talking about, basically, he was just asked, who are these that are clothed in white? John is seeing a vision of people in heaven clothed in white. He was asked, who are they? And he's like, I don't know, you tell me. And this is what the Revelator told John. These are the ones coming out of the great tribulation. These are the ones coming out of the great tribulation. Okay, so Revelation, the Bible, is defining the seals as the great tribulation. Now, as we're going to see, saints are still on the earth through several trumpets, potentially leading into some bowls. We're going to look at that later. This is not where the rapture occurs. So, the Great Tribulation happens, and many, many, many will die during that time. It will be very, very hard. Over 25% of the earth, at least, will die during that time. Christian and unchristian. This will be earlier in chapters 1 through 3, somewhere in there, at the very beginning, the Revelator tells John, I'm going to show you the things that will come to test the whole earth. Okay, that's the seals, right? And then obviously the trumpets and bowls. The whole earth. That's Christian and non-Christian. That's America and every other country. That's Jerusalem, Israel, and every other country. The whole earth will feel, especially these seals. There are some things that will be specifically for the non-believer, those who have the mark or those who don't have the seal of God written on their foreheads. We'll get into all that. But this is specifically what the Bible refers to as the Great Tribulation, those 5 or 6 seals. Now, because there will be saints, as we'll see, through several of the seals, trumpets, and even bowls, we could call everything from seal 1 to the last, at least to the last trumpet, the tribulation. When we get to the 7th trumpet, or the first bowl of wrath, there's some debate there, and we'll see why in just a minute. Okay, so I hope this is making sense so far. Revelation is anything but an easy and simple, straightforward conversation. But alas, we're giving it our best shot. Now, in the first 8 verses of chapter 7, before we jump here to Revelation 8 and 9, where we're going to look at some of the effects of the 7th seal specifically, we should note that sometime in between the 6th and 7th seal, 144,000 Israelites are sealed. 144,000 Jews are sealed. These are Jews on the earth, right? And 12,000 from every tribe. Okay, so that happens in between seals 6 and 7. All right, moving into now, sorry, my notepad keeps shutting off here. Moving now into Revelation 8 and 9, we have the 7th seal, which is 7 trumpets. Remember that picture I drew for us earlier. The 7th seal is 7 trumpets. So the 7th seal cannot be completed like the 6th seal was until all 7 trumpets have finished, right? Okay. Chapter 8 lays out the first 4 trumpets for us. A third of the earth is burned. An asteroid or comet of some sort hits the sea and kills the fish. An asteroid or comet of some sort ruins the water. And then the 4th trumpet would be like celestial plagues in the heavens. Moving into chapter 9, we now have trumpets 5 and 6 that are described to us. Let's see. Okay. Number 5 is the tormenting locust. That's trumpet number 5, and also the first woe. Now we're going to get into 3 woes, which I'm not going to spend a lot of time on here today because they're more or less events that happen within the timeline and they're not as important to the timeline. So I'm not going to get into it, but you may be interested to know that the tormenting locusts are the first woe. Now, these tormenting locusts have a king. And we're going to look at a series of beasts in the book of Revelation. And this is the first beast. So we have the dragon, who is not a beast. At least I'm not classifying the dragon as a beast for the sake of our conversation right now. Dragon is Satan, representative of Satan throughout the entire book of Revelation. The first beast we run into is the beast of the abyss, or the angel of the bottomless pit, as some translations refer to it. This beast is the king of locusts. Now, this is very interesting, and I don't intend to spend much time on it now, but I do want to kind of provoke your curiosity, and you can maybe do some study on your own. In Proverbs, you'll remember that it says that locusts have no king. That's very interesting. And Ezekiel 38:39, when we're hearing about Gog, Magog, Gog is actually referred to as the king of locusts. It's really interesting. In Revelation chapter 20, I believe, we'll get to it in a few minutes, at the battle that ends all battles, We have a reference to Gog and Magog at that point. So it's very interesting to me here that in this particular trumpet, this tormenting locust, we have a king of locusts, which is very interesting. And I think there's something to that, but again, that's not what this particular video is for. So I digress and move on. The sixth trumpet is the famous Euphrates angels. Now, here's why the timeline's important. Because we've seen the Euphrates, we've seen the reports, we've seen the news reports of the Euphrates drying up, right? And that relates really not so much to the book of Revelation. It relates more to some prophecies in the Old Testament. So that's fair. However, there are those who may try to say the angels at the Euphrates River are being released because it's drying up. That would be poor biblical literacy. Because, at least in my opinion, and I am totally able to be wrong about all of this. So just throw that out there. But from what I'm seeing when I read the book of Revelation, if I take it at face value, the Euphrates angels are released at the sixth trumpet. That means the fifth trumpet needs to happen first, right? That would only make sense. And so would the fourth trumpet, second trumpet, third trumpet, first trumpet. We have not, to my knowledge, I can't imagine that any of these have actually taken place at this point. I know there have been some catastrophic natural disasters, and I know a lot of people have been killed by different illnesses and wars and different things. But I can't even imagine, thinking back to the fourth seal, the green horse, where it says a quarter of the earth will be killed. I can't even imagine that. Like, even if we take a quarter, let's just say, some people might say, well, that's specifically talking about Israel. Well, have we even seen a quarter of Israel killed? Maybe we have. Maybe, we could go back and look at some statistics and see if that was accomplished in the Holocaust. I don't know. But I just certainly can't imagine that we've seen any of the trumpets begin at this point in time. So, the Euphrates angels, that's why we really want to be careful when we're listening and watching the news for different prophecies to be fulfilled and stuff. We want to know where we're at in the timeline, and we want to know where those prophecies are supposed to be at in the timeline as well, okay? Also, along with the sixth trumpet, there's a very large army. 200 million man is what most people agree upon. Some say 200,000 because of the way the original languages work, but there's a very large army of troops. Let's call it 200 million troops. Kill a third of people. Now, I don't know if you're following the math here, but back in the fourth seal, we had 25% killing of, depopulation, essentially, death of people. And now at the sixth trumpet, we have 33% of whatever's left by this point in the process are killed. We're narrowing down to a very small group of people worldwide, if these numbers are literal and representative of the entire earth rather than maybe just the people of Israel. Okay, so let's move on to Revelation 10. These are events that happen, Revelation 10 through chapter 11, 14, are events that take place between trumpets 6 and 7. And this PowerPoint I'll make available to you as well if you'd like it, so you can have a snapshot of this, because I know it's a lot. It takes a lot to get this all. And I know this would be, if there's anyone out there who's really good visually making these things, I'm not, but this is almost essential to have as visual. That's why I tried to put together a PowerPoint to the best of my ability, but I'm not a artistic creative person, so it's very difficult. I tried my best, so I'll make this available to you if you want it. Just let me know. Revelation chapter 10 through chapter 11, verse 14, we see events that are taking place between the sixth and seventh trumpet. That's important. Here's where that small scroll comes in. And we're doing fairly well on time, so I'm happy about that. I saw another mighty angel coming down from heaven, wrapped in a cloud with a rainbow over his head. Face was like the sun. And it goes on to describe this angel. And this angel has a small scroll, right? Tells John to eat it. It'll be as sweet as honey in your mouth, but bitter in your stomach. And then he tells John to seal it up because there's going to be coming a day where you're going to need to prophesy again. But this is very important. If you're taking notes, write this down. At the end of verse 6, the angel says this: there will be no more delay, but that in the days of the trumpet call, that he's talking about the seventh one, trumpet call to be sounded by the seventh trumpet, the mystery of God would be fulfilled, just as he announced to his servants, the prophets. This is why we have to know the book of Revelation. The vast majority of what we hear the prophets talking about are fast forwarded to the seventh trumpet. Specifically, we have very little prophecy, though we have some, on the seals and the first 6 trumpets. The vast majority of what the prophets received flashes all the way to the 7th trumpet. The vast majority of end times events that have been made so popularized by Left Behind and Protestantism and pre-trib theology this is all information packed within the 7th trumpet. The problem is, as we've already looked at, there's a lot that has to happen before we get to the 7th trumpet. Like a lot of really big, unmissable, unmistakable events that have to happen before we get to the 7th trumpet. And what this angel is telling John is that seal up the scroll, you're going to have to prophesy again. But as soon as this 7th trumpet blows, there's going to be no more delay. That leads me to believe that from the first seal to the 6th trumpet, that could take who knows how many years. I mean, it could take generations, maybe. There's no time slot on that. But what this angel does say is that from the 7th trumpet on, there's going to be no more delay. That tells me things are going to happen with, in a very relatively short amount of time. What that time is, I don't know. I'm going to assume it's going to look like 3.5 years or so to 7 years. If we're looking at maybe the 7th week of Daniel, even though that's not in the book of Revelation necessarily. What we see in the book of Revelation are days. So 12,680 days or whatever it is. We'll get to it in a minute, but 3.5 years, essentially, that's in Revelation. So I'm thinking anywhere from 3.5 years to 7 years, everything that has to happen in the 7th trumpet. That means all of the bowls that we're going to look at will happen in a relatively short amount of time, in contrast to the first seal to the 6th trumpet, which could take generations, maybe. We don't know. It could happen quick, but we don't know. So this angel gives John the scroll. He says, eat it, seal it up. And then 2 witnesses come. And this is very interesting. Mind you, this is in between the 6th and 7th seal, right? So the 5th seal was the tormenting locust. That's still going on to some degree. How do I know that? By the time the 2 witnesses show up, they're specifically in Jerusalem. Again, this is all in these chapters here that I'm referencing. They're in Jerusalem, working signs and wonders, making world leaders very, very angry. And the reason I know the locusts are still relevant is because Revelation tells us that the beast that rose from the bottomless pit, the beast of the abyss, who is the king of the locusts, trumpet number 5, specifically kills the 2 witnesses. He kills the 2 witnesses, and they remain dead in the streets of Jerusalem for a number of days, right? And then they rise from the dead. They blow everyone's mind. They hear a loud voice from heaven saying, come up here. And they ascend in a cloud to heavens, and their enemies watched them. Okay, we have not, I cannot say that we have experienced this event. I feel like even if it's not like there's some allegory here, I feel like we would know. We're just going to know where we're at in these events here. Okay. But here's what happens after they go to ascend into heaven. At that time, at that very hour, there was a great earthquake, and 1/10 of the city fell. 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake. Okay. 1/10 of what city? Jerusalem. We're told earlier on that these witnesses are in the land that their Lord was crucified in. Right. So we know that's going to be Jerusalem. And so 1/10 of the city fell. 1/10 of Jerusalem fell. We haven't seen that. Right. Even if it's not a literal earthquake. All right. Let's just say we want to say it's, I don't know, a war or someone invades Jerusalem, like, it's very possible. And that's metaphoric for an earthquake. And then 10% of the city fell and 7,000 people were killed in that earthquake. We haven't even seen that yet. I mean, even if we look at the unfortunate events of October 7th, I don't think we see the markers being met here for that. So, So anyway, that's where we're at. After these events, right? The two witnesses come. They do their signs and wonders for the time that they're given. And Revelation tells the time that they're given. And you have to forgive me, it's 1,260 days. So the witnesses themselves will be here 1,260 days. What is that, 3.5 years? I think that's the number for 3.5 years. So the witnesses themselves will have 3.5 years. That's an entire cycle of, almost an entire presidential cycle that will have these witnesses here doing what they're doing. At the end of that, then they're killed for 3 days, and then they raise, and then this earthquake happens. We haven't seen that unfold. So stop with me and think about this. Have we seen the mark of the beast yet in the book of Revelation at this point? Have we seen the beast of the earth? Have we seen the beheading of the saints? Have we seen any of that at this point? No. It's on the horizon. It's very near. But there's a lot that has to happen before we even get to that seventh trumpet. And I think maybe we're in the birth pains of that. I pray we are. I pray we're getting on the road with this thing. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's not get so popularized with modern media and culture and different things that we forget. Let's just go back to this and study this. Because if we do that, we're going to be really well equipped to handle where we're at today and where we're heading tomorrow, right? Okay. So the second woe was the two witnesses. The earthquake happens. The beast of the abyss kills them. All of this stuff. All right. Moving on now to Revelation. We talked about this. The two witnesses. All right. 15 verse 19. The seventh trumpet. The seventh trumpet is blown. Okay. Here we are. The seventh trumpet is blown. This is the season, the moment that prophecy looks forward to. Old Testament prophecy, the vast majority of things prophesied are going to be from this point forward. We're going to start to see a lot of things that Paul talked about, Jesus talked about, and all the Old Testament prophets they talked about are going to be little pieces of everything that happens within the seventh trumpet. Now, you need to know that from chapters 12 to 19, and in my PowerPoint, I have Revelation 11:15 through chapter 19. That's what that means on my PowerPoint, in case that's confusing. Is all the events of the seventh trumpet. That's a lot of real estate given to the seventh trumpet, right? That is 7 chapters, and that's basically what we've gotten. It took, give or take, I haven't done the math, so don't quote me on it, but for all the seals and everything that happens in between some of the seals, and then all of the trumpets, the 6 trumpets, and the things that happen in between some of those, took less than 7 chapters. And here we have a whole 7 chapters given to just the seventh trumpet, right? So this is a long period of time. Again, we don't know how long, maybe one generation or multiple. But what we do know for certain is that once the seventh trumpet blows, things escalate rapidly. All right, and so we're going to dive in here. Chapter 12, we kick off the seventh trumpet with a story of a woman and the dragon. Okay, and maybe we'll do a teaching specifically on this, breaking down some of what the metaphor might mean. I don't want to spend too much time on that, but what I will say is it is my belief at present, and again, I need to do a deep dive, but it's my belief at present that the woman represents Israel, or the eventually the woman will represent, as we'll see, those in covenant with the God of the creator of the heavens and the earth, right? So the first time we read of the woman in chapter 12, she gives birth to this son. This son is caught up to heaven. I believe at that point, the woman is Israel, giving birth to Christ. Christ comes, defeats, death, hell, and the grave, and his life on the earth, and then he's caught up to heaven. Then this dragon is outraged with the woman, okay? She's pregnant, she's crying, okay? And this is very important that we understand, all right? She gives birth, and then a sign appeared in heaven, a great red dragon. Now catch this. The dragon himself has 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 diadems, okay? Now, this is going to match the beasts that we're going to see in a minute, and that's significant. So the dragon himself has those features. Okay? The woman fled into the wilderness. Right? Her male child was caught up to rule the nations with a rod of iron, caught up to God and his throne. The woman fled into the wilderness where she had a place prepared by God in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. Now, war arose in heaven, right? And that's where we get into in verse 7 of chapter 12, right? And at this point, this war happens in heaven and Satan is cast down and there's no room for him anymore in heaven. At this point, he can no longer be an accuser, okay? At this point, he can no longer be an accuser. And I believe it's Michael the angel that says, rejoice, O heavens, you and you who dwell in them, because the dragon has been cast down to the earth, and he's no longer able to be up there and influence and make things miserable for them, I assume. But then he goes on to say this, but woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows his time is short. Now, I don't suspect we're there yet. I suspect we're still at the phase where the enemy is our accuser. He's the accuser of the brethren. And my personal line of thinking at this point is, well, the 7th trumpet can't happen before the 6th or the 5th trumpet, so we're probably not there yet, right? And what I tend to believe is that we have this flashback of this woman who gave birth to Christ and Christ caught up, right? Because it's painting the totality of the narrative here. And so maybe there's a shot, that some of this is flashback and it's kind of painting the narrative of where we're leading up to. And so maybe Satan has been cast down. I don't know. I certainly think that the woman giving birth to Christ, he was caught up, is a flashback to kind of help set up the narrative we're about to see. But I think that the enemy being mad, the dragon being mad about this, making war in heaven, it's up for debate whether or not that's actually taken place yet. But it's not necessarily indicative of the 7th trumpet, right? And we're going to see that in just a minute. Now, after the dragon had been thrown down to the earth, he was furious. And this is why I don't think this has happened yet. Because as a response to be throwing down to the earth, the dragon does 2 things. He's thrown down to the earth. He's very mad. Michael the archangel says, woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil's come down to you and his full attention's on you. He can't be up here in heaven anymore, and he knows his time is short. So things are going to get really rocky for you guys down there. And he does 2 things in response to this. One, he goes back to the woman and tries to attack her, but she is given 2 wings like an eagle, okay? And she's saved. So he's angry now. He's been cast out of heaven, and he didn't get to destroy the woman. In this case, Israel and the covenant people of God, because this is now post-Christ's ascension into heaven, right? And so this is new covenant. So the first time the woman represented the old covenant. The second time after Christ has ascended to the Father, she represents the new covenant. How do I know that? Because the first thing he does in his anger of being cast down to the earth and the woman evading him is he attacks the rest of her offspring. And the Bible describes the rest of her offspring in verse 17 as those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. This tells me it's Jews and Christians. Jews and Christians are who will be attacked at this point, okay? Because specifically, they hold to the testimony of Jesus. Okay, that's our indicator. And then at this point, this is the second thing he does in retaliation to being thrown out of heaven and the woman evading. So he tried to stop the covenant, and he couldn't stop the covenant. So now he goes and takes his vengeance out on the offspring of the covenant, right? He stands on the sand of the sea. And from the sea, we get our first beast. So here we are, we're in Revelation 13 now. We get our first beast. This is all in retaliation to being kicked out of heaven, and the woman's evaded him. He stands on the sea, and he's like, I got this plan, and I'm going to really wreak havoc on the earth. Out of the sea, a beast rises out of the sea with 10 horns, 7 heads, and 10 diadems. Okay? Very similar to the dragon. 10 horns, 7 heads. The dragon had 7 diadems. The beast of the sea has 10 diadems, crowns. All right? And this particular beast of the sea has blasphemous names on its head, on all of its heads. Okay? Now, this is going to be not one man, right? This is going to be a system that has multiple leaders, multiple rulers. Maybe some have likened it to the United Nations. Some have likened it maybe to the Islamic Caliphate. So different. Maybe some have likened it to BRICS. BRICS, what is that? The acronym for Russia, Iran, China, and so on and so forth. So it's a multinational system of some sort with multiple leaders. And you have basically this beast of the sea, blasphemous names all over its heads, okay? And it goes on to give a description. It was like a leopard. His feet were like a bear. Its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And then watch this. The dragon, it says the dragon gave his power and throne and great authority to this beast. So the dragon, the ruler of our world as we know it, gives power and great authority to this beast. In verse 3, it says, one of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed. It has 7 heads, and only one of them will have a mortal wound. All right? There's popular, media that would try to depict this as the Antichrist who has a mortal wound and is raised. That's not the case. Okay? This is a multinational type system that has 7 heads, all right? 10 horns and 10 crowns. Those all represent different types of leadership and different things within it. I'm not going to break into that this time. But only one of the 7 heads receives a mortal wound. All right, and so we need to be looking for that. Maybe it's if it's the Islamic Caliphate, we need to know the 7 regimes there, and has one received a mortal wound in its head? Or if we're thinking it's the UN, we look for some of these things to help us determine. However, we're nowhere near this part in the story, at least by my calculations, and as I've repeated a number of times, subject to be wrong about any of this. I'm just kind of laying out how I see it here written in the book of Revelation. All right, so after this, one of these 7 heads is healed of their mortal wound, the earth marveled, and then they followed the beast, and they worshipped not the beast, but the dragon, okay, who had given his authority to the beast, and then they worshipped the beast. It's very important here, all right? This is so important that we understand this, right? Because I'm gonna show you something, and we're gonna spend a little bit of time reading chapter 13. It's probably gonna be the most I read out of any single chapter, because we're all curious about the Antichrist. We're all very curious about the Antichrist. We think he's the guy that's going to come and institute a mark of the beast. But what we're going to find out is this beast of the sea doesn't even introduce the mark of the beast. Okay? It's another beast. Remember, there's multiple beasts. We've already seen the beast of the abyss. Now we see the beast of the sea. And what happens is one of those 7 heads are healed. They worship the dragon, Satan, and then they worship the beast, who is like the beast and who can fight against it. All right. And the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months, which is 3.5 years. Okay? It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. And it also, it was allowed to make war on the saints to conquer them. Friends, there are saints present at this time. The reason pre-trib theology is messy, as we talked about much earlier on, and trying to define tribulation, right? Right here, we have saints who the beast of the sea makes war upon. I am not here to say this pre-trib, post-trib, or mid-trib. I'm here to say, whatever your theology is, there are saints on the earth when this beast of the sea makes war against them. Okay? And so we need to take that into account. And watch what it says. He makes war. He was allowed to make war on the saints, which are those in covenant with the Lord, and to conquer them. All right? We need to be prepared for this. I always say I'm praying for pre, but I'm preparing for post. And this is what I mean by that is, how do we prepare a generation? You know, I have young children, and my thought is, okay, if this happened in my generation and the beast of the sea happens in my generation and he makes war on the saints, that would be me. How am I preparing my 5, 6, 4-year-old, 7, 5-year-old, whatever, to see their mom and dad potentially have their head cut off? You know, we don't want to think about that. And this is why I say I pray for pre. I'm praying that no one has to endure that. But I'm preparing for post. That means I'm saying, look, there's indication in God's word that saints are here during this time that we're about to see some tribulation take place. How am I preparing for that? Hoping I'm wrong about the conclusions I'm drawing, yes. Nonetheless, how am I preparing for that in case I'm not wrong, right? Because this is what the scriptures are telling us. This is what the Revelator is revealing. Okay? Authority was given to the beast of the sea over every tribe and people, language, and nation. This is going to be a global thing. We're well aware of that. And all who dwell on the earth will worship it, the beast of the sea. Everyone whose name has not been found written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain. Okay? Again, I could break into all of these things in so much detail, but that's not what tonight's for. I'm trying to stay focused and on track here. Verse 10, I do want to read this though. If anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he will go. If anyone is to be slain with the sword he must be slain. Watch this. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. If you believe in a pre-trib rapture, then your tribulation has to be after this. Because scripture is telling us that there's specifically in this time going to be a call for endurance and perseverance of the faith of the saints. Later on in the book of Revelation, we're going to see saints in heaven who the Revelator identifies as saints who did not love their life even unto death. They overcame by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony, which is their testimony of Christ. And they did not love their lives even to the point of death, meaning they were willing to die for their testimony. This is what this is talking about, okay? Those are the saints that died during this time. All right, now we have a second beast. Again, these two beasts are a retaliation to what? To Satan being kicked out of heaven, number one, and Satan attempting to attack the woman, which is the covenant bearer, right? But he failed at that. So now he makes war on the saints, and he does that by creating these two beasts, the beast of the sea, which is that multi-headed system governance that desires worship. That's important. And now we're introduced to the second beast that he creates in retaliation to his anger, and we're going to read a little bit about it. Then I saw another beast. This is starting at verse 11, rising out of the earth. It had two horns like a lamb, so very small, subtle lambs compared to the horns that the dragon and the beast of the sea have. And it spoke like a dragon, authority. It exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast. That's important. The beast of the earth doesn't want worship. It doesn't want to be worshipped. It points its worship back to the beast of the sea. Right? Makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound had been healed. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people. And by the signs that is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on the earth. All right? We know through other prophecies that there's going to be a great falling away, a great deception. Right? This beast is also referred to as the false prophet. Okay? And so it's going to be maybe a religious figure would be more appropriate, whereas the first beast is more of a system of multiple countries and leaders and things that are kind of set up to govern. All right, it performs great signs, makes fire come down from heaven. It deceives those who dwell on the earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast. Okay, so the beast of the earth makes an image to the first beast, not to himself. And he gives breath to that image. This sounds to me like AI, and again, I'm basically taking what I see in my world today and saying like, yeah, that could work here. And it may not be that at all. I'm just taking what's relevant to me, just like John does when he says, hey, I saw these flying scorpion things that shoot, and maybe that was a helicopter. He didn't know, you know what I'm saying? So he didn't have the vernacular. I only have the vernacular for what's around me. He only knew of scorpions and things of that nature. He used the vernacular he had. To me, this sounds like AI is the technology that could give breath to this image and make it come to life, right? So the image might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. This is wild. We have the beast of the sea who wants to be worshipped. We have the beast of the earth who wants the world to worship the beast of the sea, so much so that he creates an image of some sort, gives breath to it, and that image has so much intelligence that it can actually require the entire world to worship the beast that the image is made to represent. And the image, this lifeless image that was given breath, can actually kill people that don't worship. To me, this sounds like AI. To me, this sounds like a technology that can track people and know if you're worshiping or bowing down to this seven-headed, beast, this governmental institution. But again, that's just what it sounds like to me, and it's speculation. Okay, so moving forward, it also causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark that is the name of the beast or the number of its name. Okay, so basically, It sounds like what it's saying here is the image that's created actually creates the mark of the beast. Potentially, it could be read in a way that the second beast is the one who creates the mark. It's this false prophet. But in verse 16, it was talking about the image. And then it said also, so I'm thinking that it's the image that's created that actually creates the mark of the beast. Not the seven-headed beast of the sea. They don't create the mark of the beast. The false prophet doesn't necessarily create the mark of the beast. Rather, the image that is created and given breath creates the mark of the beast. All right? I'm going to repeat that one more time because it's such a new concept and it's so foreign to what's been depicted in Left Behind movies and our theology and doctrine, okay? Satan, I'm going to summarize this. In his anger and a response to his anger from being kicked out of heaven and not being able to destroy the woman, the bearer of the new covenant, he then turns his focus to the inhabitants of the earth to attack them, mainly those in covenant with Christ. How does he do that? He creates two beasts, the beast of the sea, the seven-headed, 10-horned, 10-crowned beast that is governing the world. All right, one of those heads is killed by the sword and resurrects. The whole world marvels and worships the beast of the sea. Then there's a beast of the earth that the dragon creates. That is Satan, who has two horns. It's more of a false prophet figure that creates signs and wonders and causes people to worship the first beast. Notice the false prophet doesn't want worship for himself. Then this false prophet creates an image that is supposed to represent the immaterial reality of the first beast and gives it breath, gives it intelligence, gives it life, so that the image can make everybody worship the beast of the sea. And that image can also kill people who don't worship the beast of the sea. That image can also create a mark that is required for everyone to have, rich, poor, small, or great, the Bible says, that if they don't have it, they can't buy or sell. And that mark is the name of the beast or the number of its name. And that mark needs to be on the right hand or the forehead. The King James Version says in the right hand or in the forehead, while other translations say on. All right, that could matter when push comes to shove, but it doesn't matter right now. All right, so does that make sense to you? I hope that's clear. And I hope you are beginning to see, wow, this is not the picture we've been painted. But the book of Revelation is painting something a little bit different. That if I'm looking for this other picture that's been painted through Hollywood and media and Protestant, modern day Protestant isms and different things, I might miss things I need to be well aware of. I might be one that's deceived because I'm not looking for this false prophet figure who's actually deceiving, right? I might bow to this new world order, let's call it that, or this first beast of the sea, which is clearly some sort of governmental system that's set up. And it's not one leader, it's not one king, it's not one man. It's seven with 7 crowns and 7 horns. This is a collective, right? That the world is going to worship this collective, and specifically the image that's created for the collective. Now watch. Some people have tried to say, well, it's Nero. Nero is the Antichrist. And he came and he fulfilled everything. Nero didn't fulfill anything in Revelation 13. Nothing. How do I know that? 1, Nero wanted worship for himself. The person who wants worship for himself does not create the mark of the beast, right? The false prophet creates an image for the first beast, and that image creates the mark of the beast. Secondly, in Nero, we've already talked about the case for the chronological timeline, right? Nero happened way back when, right? And maybe Nero was around, and maybe some of the seals were going on back then. Debatable, possible. But we've already talked about this is all happening in the 7th trumpet. These are all events of the 7th trumpet. That means the 6th trumpet, the 5th trumpet, the 6th seal, the 5th seal have to happen before we get to the 7th trumpet. And many of those things, without debate, we have not seen come to fruition yet. So we're highly likely not to this phase of the end time timeline. Nero couldn't have done it. So these are why we need to understand the details in the timeline, right? Okay, moving forward to chapter 14. Let's keep moving along. Let's see. Get you guys going on the PowerPoint here. Revelation 14 and 15. We have some events that take place between the mark of the beast being instituted and the bowls of wrath, okay? So the lamb and the 144,000. The 144,000 by this time have been redeemed from the earth, okay? That's incredibly important, but we're not going to dive deeply into some of these details tonight. Again, maybe I'll come back and do some deeper dives into just a few chapters at a time. I want us to try to stay focused on the timeline. Verse 6, the messages of the three angels. I saw another angel flying directly overhead with an eternal gospel to proclaim to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, language, and people. And he said with a loud voice, "Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come." Okay, so we're leading into the bowls of wrath, the bowls of judgment. All right, and so this is what one of the first angel is proclaiming. All right, and he's saying, "Fear God, judgment is coming. Worship him who made heaven and earth, seas, springs of water." All right, and then the second angel comes and gives a message. Fallen is Babylon the Great, she who made all nations drink the wine of her passion and her sexual immorality. Okay, and what's interesting is we're seeing that the angels announce that, and we haven't actually gotten to this Babylon figure. So this is a prophetic declaration, right? This is a prophetic declaration of this angel. The third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, "If anyone worship the beast and its image and receives a mark on his forehead or his hand, he also will drink the wine of God's wrath, poured full strength into the cup of his anger, and he will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels, in the presence of the Lamb." Okay? These worshipers of the beast and its image, and whoever receives the mark of its name. Okay? So here's a call for endurance of the saints. This is verse 12. This is verse 12. Again, we just saw this in chapter 13. Another call for the endurance of the saints. Again, if the saints have been raptured by this point in the narrative, there's no need to call for endurance of the saints. So if the idea is a pre-trib rapture, fine, but the tribulation would have to be defined as events after this. And most of the time, pre-trib is defining all of these events as the tribulation. And we've already talked about the biblical definition of the Great Tribulation earlier in this video. All right, endurance for the saints. There's a call for endurance. Verse 13, "And I heard a voice from heaven saying this, write this." Watch this. This is important information. "Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord." So again, there's people in covenant with Christ on the earth at this time. And he's saying, blessed are those who die, those who are in covenant with Christ, who die from now on. Why is that going to be important? It's going to be important when we get to the millennial reign. All right, so keep that in the back of your mind. "Blessed indeed," says the Spirit, "that they may rest from their labors, for their deeds follow them." Okay, moving into verse 14. Says, now here's where a possible rapture could maybe be, and I'll explain my rationale. We have this angel who waves a sickle, a sharp sickle, all right, in his hand, and reaps a harvest from the earth. "Pull your sickle, reap a harvest, for the hour to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is fully ripe." So he swung his sickle, right? And this relates back to Matthew 13, verses 24 through 43, where Jesus gives the parable of the end time, where the wheat and the tares are growing together, right? And he says, "At the end of the age, my angels will harvest at the end of the age when everything's fully grown, so that way we don't throw some of the wheat in where the tares belong," right? And so he's making a reference to the last trumpet, the end of the age, where he's reaping his wheat, right? So if there's some options here, I'm not gonna beat it too long. If this is a rapture type scenario, it's probably a prophetic call for what's about to happen for the events coming forward. So the three angels we just heard, this is still part of that. So the three angels we just heard are giving a prophetic call of the events that are about to happen. It's not saying that these events happened right now in the timeline. Okay, and this would be part of that. So there's going to be a reaping of the harvest, and then there's another angel that had a sharp sickle, right? And it reaped the earth for ripe grapes, and those grapes were then put into the wine press of wrath. Okay, so we have the righteous from the unrighteous being separated here. So I tend to hold the position, the way this reads, if I'm reading this like a book, like a narrative, like the way an author would write it, I'm seeing at verse 14, there is now a break in the narrative. We're leading into the 7 plagues, right? And before that happens, just like we've seen a number of times where there's events where the author will stop and put in events in between the certain seals or in between certain trumpets. Right now, remember how long of a period we have for all the events of the 7th trumpet from Revelation 12 to 19. All those events are the 7th trumpet. So it makes sense that the author would stop and put in, okay, we're entering into a new phase of events, and we're entering into the bowls and the plagues, for the author to say, okay, here's a message from 3 angels, and those angels kind of give a snapshot of all the things that are going to happen within this next section of the narrative. All right, moving into chapter 15, we have the word then. All right, and I remember how I mentioned at the beginning of our session to pay attention to these words of are, after this, now, then, because it lets us know where we're at in the timeline and how things are following. So then follows, in my belief, the end of verse 13. And I believe chapter 14 and all the way up to the end, the entire chapter 14 are events that are sort of happening between the mark and the bull's wrath, right? Or they're the prophetic images of things that are about to happen. So we could take chapter 14 out, and we stopped reading at chapter 13 with the introduction of the mark and jump straight to 15, and then we see the word then, and that would be a sequential. I can't talk. Sequential. This would be the sequence. I can't pronounce it tonight. The proper order. So then I saw a sign in heaven, great and amazing sign, 7 angels with 7 plagues, which are the last, for with them the wrath of God is finished, right? So we're having the bowls. Remember the image I drew you guys at the beginning, where the 7 seals, and the seventh seal itself contains 7 trumpets. The 7th trumpet contains 7 bowls within it, along with a lot of other events. That's what we're seeing now, right? So when Paul talks about at the last trumpet, and he talks about an event that we haven't gotten to yet. And when Jesus talks about at the last trumpet, there's certain events, but they're very different from the events Paul describes at the last trumpet. This is how that's possible, because there's a whole host of events and seasons that happen within the last trumpet. I believe that scripture tells us the last trumpet is a period of 3.5 years. And I'm going to show you why in just a minute. It's revealed to us that the beast of the sea was given 3.5 years. And we're going to see what happens at one of the bowls. So verse 2 of chapter 15, there's a sea of glass mingled with fire, and those who had conquered the beast and its image, the number of its name, standing beside the sea of glass. Okay, these are the people that were martyred, essentially. When it says conquered the beast, it means they were faithful even unto death, right? They were singing a song here. I'm not going to go into all of that tonight, right? And then out of the sanctuary comes the 7 bowls. No one was allowed to enter the temple until these 7 bowls were poured out, right? And then chapter 16, we got the first 6 bowls that take place, okay? And let's see, do I have a snapshot? I don't think I do right now. Okay, that's okay. We have these first 6 bowls poured out. The first angel poured out his bowl on the earth, right? Painful sores. These are the bowls that remind us a lot of Egypt, right? The plagues in Egypt. Notice that the seals that we've gone through and walked through and the trumpets that we've gone through and walked through don't necessarily remind us of Egypt, but these do. The sores that break out on people, right? Then we have the sea became like blood, right? Like the blood of a corpse, and every living thing died that was in the sea. The third angel poured out his bowl into the rivers and the springs, so the drinking water, they became blood, right? And so we go through these bowls. The fifth angel, I'm going to kind of jump around to kind of help us out with time. The fifth angel, watch, this is why I think 3.5 years from the time the beast of the sea is given power. Because the fifth seal, when it's poured out, it's specifically poured out on the throne. This is verse 10, chapter 15. It's specifically, or chapter 16, specifically poured out on the bowl of the throne of the beast, and its kingdom was plunged into darkness. Okay? People gnawed their tongues in anguish and cursed the God of heaven. So we, at the fifth bowl, we see the demise of the beast system. But the beast system was only given 3.5 years to have authority. And it ends right here at the fifth bowl. That tells me from the time that the beast of the sea is set up and given authority by the dragon, he's given 3.5 years. We've got 3.5 years and we'll be at this fifth bowl. All right? Because it's at the fifth bowl that kingdom is plunged into darkness. The sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water dried up, okay, to prepare the way for the kings of the east. Now, again, this goes back to what I mentioned earlier, all the way back when we were talking about the 4 angels at the Euphrates, and everything we were seeing about the Euphrates is drying up and all this stuff. Does that mean we're right here at the sixth bowl? Well, I guess anything's possible, but no, is my position, because again, there's so many things in the timeline that we've not crossed yet. And because of the picture I drew you guys at the beginning of this video, and for those who are joining us on Zoom here midway through and at this point, this video is going to be recorded and put online. Go back when I'm referencing things earlier in the video. It'll make more sense at that point. But I drew a picture at the beginning of the video to show why these things must be happen in sequential order. And how they're locked in. And it ties back to the fact that the final seal contains 7 trumpets, and the final trumpet contains 7 bowls. So we can't get to the 7th trumpet or the 6th trumpet without first getting to the 5th seal, because we can't get to the trumpets until the last seal is open. You follow me? And the same follows the same pattern all the way down to these bowls. Here's where the Euphrates is dried up. Maybe it's begun drying. Maybe it's dried up to prepare the way. Or maybe there's still something yet to happen for these kings that will come down, right? And I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, out of the mouth of the false prophet, 3 unclean spirits like frogs. They are demonic spirits performing signs. They go to the kings of the whole world to assemble them for battle on the great day of the God Almighty, okay? And they assemble them to the place that is in Hebrew called Armageddon. Okay, and then we have the 7th bowl here at verse 17, okay? And the 7th bowl, again, we're about to enter into one of those moments where the narrative is kind of like we're pausing to enter into a narrative. We have the 7th bowl that is poured out, and we're introduced to Babylon the Great, all right? The great city was split into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell, and God remembered Babylon the Great. So the great city, I could be wrong about this, usually that refers to Jerusalem at this earthquake. So Jerusalem's taken a beating. It's already had an earthquake way back with the 2 witnesses that had 7,000 people died and 1/10 of the city was destroyed. Here we got another earthquake in the great city that was split into 3 parts. a myriad of things happen. And then we're introduced in chapter 17 to this prostitute and this beast, okay? Now, I'm not going to spend time. I'm going to do a whole session on this prostitute and this beast. I don't want to do it tonight for the sake of time. But essentially, this beast is another beast. We've mentioned we've got a dragon, we've got a beast of the abyss, we've got the beast of the sea, beast of the earth, and now we have this other beast. Now, it's highly possible that this beast could also be the beast system, the beast of the sea. It too has 7 heads, 10 horns, and 10 crowns. However, the reason that it's probably not the beast of the sea, but it's a separate system of kingdoms, is because if you remember, the beast of the sea was described as a body of a leopard and the feet of a bear. And this particular beast is a scarlet beast. It's got the same sort of system and structure set up as the dragon and as the beast of the sea, but it's a different beast, it seems like. It's a scarlet beast that this prostitute rides upon. And this prostitute, we're explicitly told, is a city. It's a great city, and it's Babylon. And essentially, again, this woman that is this city that rules over this beast system, which is separate, in my opinion, from the beast of the sea, specifically, let's see, makes war or is drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. This tells me that, folks, that there are saints still present through all of this, right? Because this woman is drunk on the blood of those saints, specifically the martyrs of Jesus, all right? But what's interesting is the beast that she rides, they enjoy the wealth that she brings, but they actually hate being under her control. And so they actually devise a plan to conquer her, right? And God grants them the authority and the power to do that. And verse 17 talks about the 7 kings that are the 7 heads of this beast. He talks about 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other's not yet come, all of that sort of stuff. All right. But then it moves forward into verse 16. The 10 horns that you saw, they and the beast will hate the prostitute that rides it, right? And they will make her desolate, naked, and devour her flesh and burn her up with fire. For God has put it in their hearts to carry out this purpose by being of one mind, handing over their royal power to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. So the woman that you saw is the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth, okay? Now, these kings of the earth are going to want to overthrow this prostitute. And they do successfully. And that's what chapter 18 is about. It's all about the fall of Babylon. So I'll fast forward here a little bit. And then again, in 18 verse 4, I heard another voice saying, "Come out of her, my people, lest you take part in her sins." Okay? Some have speculated that's another point where maybe the rapture could take place. We're not going to dive into that, all of those types of things right now. Let's just move forward, okay? Chapter 19, we have rejoicing in the fall of Babylon. All of that's kind of depicted there. We'll spend more time on that in another session. Then we move forward and we have this marriage supper being introduced. But we have very few details about the marriage supper here, okay? We have very few details on who's going to be involved. We have very few details on when it will happen, what it will look like and stuff. So I'm going to not do that tonight, but it is important to note that she is dressed in fine linen, which is the righteous deeds of the saints. Okay, moving forward, I'm trying to get here to the end times. Revelation 19, 11 through 16, we have a vision of Jesus as conquering king, but he hasn't actually conquered yet. And then we're going to move forward to 17 through 21. That's where Jesus conquers, okay? So this is kind of important. Let me go through it very quickly. He calls the birds, the vultures to gather for the great supper of God, to eat the flesh of kings, the flesh of captains, mighty men, flesh of horses, all of this. And then I saw the beast, And the kings of the earth with their armies gathered to make war against him who is sitting on the horse and against his army. And the beast was captured, and with it the false prophet who in his presence had done all these signs. Okay? And then they were thrown alive into the lake of fire that burns with sulfur. And then the rest were slain by the sword that came from the mouth of the one sitting on the throne. Okay, so we have this war. This is one of two wars. Okay, this is going to be why the Euphrates dries up for this war. All right. Then we have chapter 20. Okay, this is the end of the end. We're getting there. Some could say that the close of the seventh trumpet was when the beasts were thrown into the abyss. But others may say, well, no, the millennial reign, maybe we can fit that into the seventh trumpet as well. Nonetheless, let's dive into this real quickly. We have in verses 1 through 5, we have the millennial reign, and we have Satan being bound for 1,000 years. Okay? Now, what's important is that we note, remember earlier where I said, blessed are those who die in the Lord from this point on. I mentioned a while back. It's those who, when the mark is introduced, specifically those who, and I'm going to try to find it for you here because some of you are not going to believe me when I tell you. Okay. Starting in verse 4, essentially only those who are beheaded as a result of not taking the mark of the beast will rule and reign with Christ for the 1,000 years. Those who are dead in the Lord before that or outside of that, they will not be resurrected at this time. And this is what chapter 20 says, starting in verse 4. Then I saw thrones, and seating on them were those whom the authority to judge was committed. Also, I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for the testimony of Jesus and for the word of God, and those who had not worshipped the beast or its image, all right, and had not received its mark on their foreheads or their hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is the one who shares in the first resurrection. Over such, the second death has no power, but they will be priests of God, and they will reign with him for 1,000 years. So it's just important to note that those who will reign with Christ, as told here in Revelation 20, are those who are specifically beheaded, those who will reign with him in the millennial reign. That's the first resurrection. Then there's a second resurrection. Most Christians that I know today think there's only one resurrection. And that's just a fun little detail. All right, so we move into verse 7 through 10, right? The defeat of Satan. And then we have the final battle, which is very interesting, right? This is at the end of those 1,000 years. Satan's released from his prison. He'll deceive the nations one more time, all the four corners of the earth, which are Gog and Magog, to gather them for battle. The numbers like the sand of the sea, right? And they marched up and broad plain of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city. But fire came down from heaven and consumed them. The devil who had deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, and that was the end of that, right? That he's now with the two beasts, sea and the earth. And then we enter into Judgment Day. Okay, 11 through 14 is all about Judgment Day, and Jesus describes Judgment Day in great detail in Matthew 24 and 25. It's all about Judgment Day. That's what Jesus is talking about. When his disciples asked him about the end times, he gives a little bit of details. He describes the seals a little bit, and then he goes into spending the vast majority of his conversation on the end times to prepare his disciples to stand at Judgment Day. That's what Matthew 24 and 25 is all about, and you can see what he's got in mind by reading verses 11 through 15. Now here's where we start to close up. We have the new age being ushered in at chapter 21. We get a look at the new heaven and the new earth, which have some beautiful details about them. In those first 8 verses, in verse 9, we get an introduction to New Jerusalem and all of its splendor, okay? And then we see briefly the river of life moving into chapter 22. That flows out of the city. And then to conclude the book, we get some final warnings, okay? And I would be remiss if I didn't give the final warning here in verse 11. Jesus is coming, all right? And then it says, let the evildoer still do evil, and the filthy still be filthy, and the righteous still do right, and the holy still be holy. Behold, I am coming soon, bringing my recompense with me to repay each one for what he has done. All right, and so there's this reminder to wash our robes in the blood of the Lamb, to follow the Lord in not just word, but also in deed, to love and to bear the fruit of the Spirit in our lives, and to make our faith more than a rational testament to information in our head, but actually follow Christ in our living, right? And so that is that. This has been super long, super in-depth. I hope it has been helpful more than confusing. Again, if you want the PowerPoint, please let me know. I'll happily provide that to you. And stick around. I would like to go into a lot of these chapters a little bit more in-depth in separate videos. I didn't have time to do that tonight for obvious reasons. So with that being said, we're going to now enter into, for those who have joined me live on the Zoom call, we're going to enter into a Q&A session for those who would like to stick around for that. For those of you who are watching later online via YouTube, stick around for the videos that will follow up later. And as always, God bless you guys.